Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon and good evening. As many of you have joined from different countries and different time zones. We welcome to Ka Homeopathy Study Group Pro Bono webinar hosted by Kavita Holistic Approach. Before we start, we would thank Universe for giving us this great opportunity with Gayatri Mantra chanted by Professor Regina from Brazil. I would like to take the privilege to say that our Ka Homeopathy Study Group is very unique homeopathy pro bono study group from the United States of America, which formed to unite world-renowned practitioners throughout the globe. Ka's mission and vision are very unique to inspire young homeopaths, mentor, provide excellency for educational purposes using holistic approaches via webinars, which provide professional continuing educational homeopathic credits for practitioners, which follow the principles of classical homeopathy, and we invite speakers for educated webinars. We value and treasure the human collective as our honorable peers. We provide merit certificate for spreading the light of homeopathy worldwide while celebrating stage 4 cancer survivors through our inspirational book talks. These webinars are for educational purposes only and see expert homeopath for treatment. This is Kavita Pokunur, board certified homeopath from Michigan, USA, president and CEO of Kavita Holistic Approach, founder and director of Ka Homeopathy Study Group. I am outreach coordinator of CHC PR committee, encouraging homeopaths to become CHC certified. I am member of Kevin Friendly Foundation, a non-profit organization that helps to serve poor people in greater needs in India. I thank our Homeopathy Study Group and Thai team for their continuous support. This webinar is moderated by Ka family, Dr. Sweta Singh, Chief Administrator, and Professor Regina Rianelli. It is being recorded as we speak and we are live on Facebook.
Bhuvaksvaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bargo Devasya Dimahi Jiyo Yona Prachodaya. Many blessings to the universe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sweta and Professor Regina. Hello, everyone. Today, February 7th, 2021, and we have our Honorable Speaker, Kim Elia, founder of Whole Health Now. He speaks about very important and interesting topic, long-term case management. Kim Elia has been studying homeopathy since 1987 and graduated from the New England School of Homeopathy. He was in clinical practice with Dr. Paul Husum, author of the Homeopathic Treatment of Children, Pediatric Constitutional Types. He is the former director of nutrition at Hartwood Institute, California, and has certified many nutritionists and worked with fantastic therapeutics with many hundreds of people. Kim serves as CEO of Whole Health Now. He has been instrumental in the creation of Whole Health Now's website, inspired to create the historic homeopathic timeline, and is responsible for a growing library of recorded interviews and presentations with today's world-renowned homeopaths on a variety of timely and relevant topics. Kim's intent is to bring homeopathic community together and to contribute to the training of effective practitioners who will bring homeopathy medicine forward into the mainstream. Students from around the world have expressed appreciation and admiration for Kim's superb knowledge of the history of homeopathy, his deep understanding of homeopathic prescribing, and his extensive knowledge of mater medicum. Kim was the principal instructor and developer of the 4-year classical homeopathy program at the Hanuman Academy in Tokyo and Osaka, Japan. He is currently developing new homeopathy projects. He was inspired to study homeopathy when he read Gandhi's quote about homeopathy. Homeopathy cures a greater percentage of cases than any other method of treatment. Homeopathy is the latest and refined method of treating patients economically and non-violently. For more information, visit website www.wholehealthnow.com to learn more courses about WHN. I love WHN courses. They are really fabulous. And so glad to see Kim in person in 2018 at JHC conference in Phoenix, Arizona. And also we had Kim at our CAR webinar along with Dr. Nancy S. last year promoting JHC 2020 Global Summit. He's one of the speakers at JHC 2021 conference. And for more details about registration to the JHC conference, visit www.jhc.info. And there is a special $10 discount to CAR webinar participants for becoming NCH member. Let us welcome our honorable speaker, Kim, to our webinar. Hello, Kim.
Hi, Kavita. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. Should I share my screen? Oh, okay. Okay, great. All right. Can you guys see my screen now? Great. And you can hear me okay? Wonderful. So good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening. I'm not sure where everybody's calling in from, but wherever it is, welcome. And for the next maybe hour and 15 minutes, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the whole issue of the art and science of follow-up prescriptions, understanding remedy reactions. This is really critical to homeopathic practice. You know, if you go to a lot of conferences today, you're always told that it's about finding the remedy, let's find that remedy, find the remedy. But the reality is that it's not always about finding the remedy. Yes, we need to find the remedy in the very first prescription, but the real secret of long-term homeopathic practice and success is to be able to prescribe the second and third and fourth and fifth prescriptions. As James Tyler Kent said, the first prescription is really kindergarten, and that the real art of long-term of successful practice is long-term case management. So I'd like to read here from Kent's lectures on homeopathic philosophy. He's got two lectures, lectures 35 and 36, where Kent writes that after a prescription has been made, the physician commences to make observations. The whole future of the patient may depend upon the conclusions that the physician arrives at from these observations, for his action depends very much on these observations, and upon his action depends the good of the patient. If he is not conversant with the import of what he sees, he undertakes to do wrong things. He will make wrong prescriptions, he will change his medicines, and do things to the detriment of the patient. George Vitulcus, in his Levels of Health, confirms this particular position by writing that finding the right homeopathic remedy to begin treatment of a patient is important, but being able to interpret the effect of the prescribed remedy is often more valuable. The homeopath must be able to tell whether the patient is progressing in the right direction toward a possible cure after the prescription. If the homeopath does not fully understand what is occurring with the patient's organism, he or she is liable to make mistakes in treatment. Unfortunately, it is commonplace for homeopaths to assume that after giving a remedy and eliminating a few symptoms, the objective of the cure has been accomplished. And then in his Science of Homeopathy, Vitulcus continues by writing, follow-up visits cannot be made simplistically or casually. The follow-up prescription is very likely the most difficult prescription. In the first interview, the goal is relatively simple, to analyze the case in such a way as to arrive at the correct remedy. Follow-up interviews, however, involve much more complex judgments. Is the patient truly better? Is the remedy producing the desired response, or has it missed or produced only a partial effect? Now that the response to the initial prescription is known, what is the true prognosis of the patient? Should a remedy be given at this point, or should the potency be changed? These are all very important questions that are essential to ask yourself during homeopathic practice. If you don't ask yourself these questions, and if you don't know the answers to these questions, you will find it very difficult to basically manage a case over an extended period of time. And that really is the key to successful homeopathic practice. The first prescription, as Kent says, really is kindergarten. The real art of successful practice is long-term case management. It's essential to our practice. And so this is something that is largely not discussed in conferences and seminars, but without knowing this information and having this knowledge, you will not be able to practice successfully. Now, this is taken from a course that I actually presented. It was, I think, an 8 or 10-hour course. And obviously, I can't address all of the issues involved in long-term case management in 90 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes. But here are some of the issues that need to be focused on and addressed in terms of understanding long-term case management and the reaction to remedies and follow-up prescriptions. So first of all, case taking, or what's referred to as case receiving. We need to have a good knowledge of that. We also need to understand posology and potency, dose and potency. We also need to understand the meaning of the word totality. And depending on which version of the organon you're reading, you may have a very different understanding of what that word actually means. And based on a different understanding and interpretation of that word, you may practice very differently and actually not in accordance with the way Hahnemann had originally intended. Of course, the patient's susceptibility is going to be very important, because if they're more sensitive or hypersensitive, then you're going to have to work very carefully with your potencies. You might have to repeat more infrequently, and many other types of considerations. We also have to have an understanding of what is referred to as the dissimilar diseases. Hahnemann addresses this particular issue in Aphorisms 35 through 40 of the Organon, where he specifically talks about dissimilar diseases. And an understanding of that particular concept in homeopathic practice is essential to long-term case management. Of course, we're going to have to understand about antidoting factors, because that will come into play over a period of time. We'll also need to understand the very important issue of complementary remedies, or remedies that follow well after other remedies. This was first introduced into homeopathy in the latter part of the therapeutic pocketbook repertory written by Clemens von Maria Berninghausen in 1846. The very last chapter of that particular book is called Concordances, and essentially that's a description of relationships of remedies that are related to each other, that either follow well after each other or complement the effect of the previous remedy. And this essential information has been expanded on by other practitioners, including people like Clark and Abderrahman and Gipser and many other practitioners. Of course, we're going to need to understand the issue of placebos. And finally, this very interesting new introduction into homeopathic practice called Levels of Health, which is actually the title of a book by George Vithoulkas, where he specifically addresses that the level of health you're in can really affect the way you respond to a particular remedy. And therefore, not all remedies can be treated in the same way, because if your level of health is higher or lower, you may have to assess the situation in a completely different manner. So these are, I think, the most critical issues that need to be discussed. Obviously, we can't address all of these, but I'm going to touch upon a few very quickly, and then I'd like to immediately get into some cases, read through the cases, and work through them together with you. I think that's the most useful way for you to understand how to actually manage a case over an extended period of time. Now, during that process of me reading through the case and you identifying those symptoms which you think are important and characteristic, and also discussing what to do in subsequent prescriptions, I'm going to ask for your participation, because the more that we can engage in a dialogue, the more I think you will find value in my presentation today. As far as I'm concerned, a Socratic approach to teaching is the most useful one, because it allows the individual who's studying to ask their own questions and find answers within the context of what is confusing for them. Actually, Alfred North Whitehead said that all of Western philosophy is a footnote to Plato. So that gives you a sense of how important that Socratic method of dialogue actually is for investigation of any subject matter. Now, the primary sources that I used to develop this particular course were, of course, the Organon. I used various editions of the Organon, 4th, 5th, and 6th editions, and also different English translations of the Organon. Of course, I used Kent's lectures on homeopathic philosophy, specifically chapters 34 and 35. The Science of Homeopathy, which I mentioned previously, by George Vithoulkas, and finally this newer work by Vithoulkas called The Levels of Health. And these are all very useful books to study and refer to when trying to understand long-term case management. Okay, now the key here is to learn the actual fundamental principles that underlie our management of a case. If you can learn those principles and then begin to apply them to casework, then those principles will become ingrained inside of you. You won't even necessarily have to think of them so much. You will actually have a type of I wouldn't say intuition, but a type of understanding that goes beyond having to critically think about each decision as it comes up. There are a number of questions, we won't be able to address these, but a number of follow-up scenarios that can be addressed, because many different things can happen after you prescribe that first dose. The person can get better, they can get worse, they can aggravate for a shorter or longer period of time. The aggravation may be lesser or worser. The mental symptoms may aggravate, but the physical symptoms may get worse. They may have a very positive amelioration, but then they immediately, all the symptoms that were improved come back. And every time you repeat the remedy again, the symptoms return. Each of these various scenarios requires a particular approach, a particular strategy, and will also be somewhat determined by the posology and potency approach that you're using. If you're using the fourth edition dry and weight approach of Kent, where you give one high potency of a dry dose like a 200C or a 1M or a 10M, then in that approach, you're going to have to wait for a very long period of time until the action of the remedy completes before re-administering another dose. If you're, and that's basically from around 1829 that you'll see the fourth edition. Now, the fifth edition is published in 1833, and in the fifth edition, Hahnemann introduces basically the idea that you can repeat the remedy while the patient is improving, provided that you succuss between each dose. So in 1833, Hahnemann begins to put the remedies in solution and succusses between each dose. As a matter of fact, after 1833, Hahnemann never prescribes a dry dose again, and actually refers to his fourth edition dry dose and weight approach as his barbaric methods. The sixth edition, the fundamental difference between the sixth edition and the fifth edition is that in the sixth edition, Hahnemann introduces the 50 millesimal potencies. Now, I will not refer to these as LM. LM is a misnomer. It's an inaccurate term. The reason for that is because in Roman numerology, you always subtract the first letter from the second letter. M is the number 1000, L is the number 50, so LM is the number 950, and it has nothing to do with 50,000th potency. Now you might say, oh, Kim Elia is being overly pedantic here. Why is he talking about LM versus 50 millesimal versus the correct designation, which should be Q potencies? Why is he talking about this pedantic nonsense? Well, the reason is because we want to be recognized within the scientific community, and if you're talking to a scientist or medical doctor, somebody who's familiar with Latin numerology nomenclature, they ask you, what does LM stand for? And you tell them 50,000, they're going to think that you don't know what you're talking about and that homeopathy is a pseudoscience not based on accurate information. So this is why it's very important to refer to things accurately, and that we should never say LM, but always Q potency, which is the more correct term for 50,000. I'll post some. I'll give these slides to Kavita, so you can post these slides up on your platform if you'd like. Okay. This is the idea of giving the water solutions. I'm going to bypass all of this stuff. Let's go ahead and go right over to here and just look at very quickly the way that things can be defined. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about aphorisms 162 through 172, which is very, very important. So aphorisms 162 through 172 is the section of the organon that talks about what to do when you have an inadequate stock of medicines. Now, what this is referring to is, at this time, when Hahnemann is publishing the sixth edition of the organon, he finishes it in February of 1842, but it's actually not published until 1921. So we know that there's a long period of time where people don't have access to it. But regardless, in the organon, in aphorisms 162 through 172, he talks about this issue of not having enough medicines. Because at this time, there's about 125 remedies available to Hahnemann and Berningshausen and Hering and the people who are following Hahnemann during this period. So they only have a very limited number of remedies. And what if the patient's symptom picture doesn't really match any one of these 125 remedies? Well, then what he says you have to do is you have to give the best approximate remedy. It will not completely cure the case. Some symptoms may go away, other symptoms may arise, but then what you do is you retake the case, look at the new symptom picture, and then prescribe the next remedy. This is fundamentally what is involved in homeopathic practice. Because the reality is, as Hahnemann says in aphorism 156, the chance of finding a remedy that perfectly matches the symptom picture of our patients is very, very unlikely. He says the matching of like the three angles on a triangle is not going to happen. Therefore, when you give a remedy, you are going to have symptoms that arise that are not perfectly fitting the remedy that you gave because there's a dissimilarity. This is also true that when we don't have enough remedies, we're going to give one. It's not going to fit perfectly. Some symptoms will go away. Some symptoms may arise. You retake the picture and you prescribe this new remedy. And this really is the method of homeopathic practice as described by Hahnemann in the Organon. Okay, so let's go ahead now and work through a case. Before I do that, are there any questions that I can answer for anybody about anything that I've said so far? As a quick preface. Are people able to unmute themselves if they want? Okay, great. So are there any comments or questions before I proceed?
Is
All
there
right,
any, do you have a minute where you can speak about the various understandings of totality?
Yes. Okay, well, let me go back and talk about it. Okay, it's a good question. So I will spend a few minutes discussing that particular issue. Okay, so part of this, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but a lot of this has to do with the fact that the Organon has been translated differently by different people and that some of the English translations are a little confusing. The best way to deal with this is to actually go back and use these old German dictionaries, and because the German language has changed significantly since Hahnemann's day. Actually, I've been told that the contemporary German is more different than the German of Hahnemann's day than contemporary English is to Shakespearean English. So it's changed quite a bit, and therefore the meaning of words has changed. So you have to use these old German dictionaries to begin to understand what Hahnemann really meant, okay? Now here is, this is from Aphorisms 6, and this is the German, and you can see that I've highlighted here certain words, Anjeter, Einslein, Krankheit. And then again here, the word Krankheit, okay? Now, in the English translations, okay, now this is from Monica Groen, who, I think this is a much better translation. She talks about Anjeter, Einslein, Krankheit, meaning every single disease, okay? Exists only one standing, every single disease. Now, here is her translation. I'm going to read her, which I think is the correct translation. She says, the unprejudiced observer takes note of nothing in every single disease, for example, cholera, except the changes in the health of the body and of the mind. He notices only the deviations from the former healthy state of the now diseased individual, coldness, vomiting, diarrhea, etc. All these perceptible signs represent the disease, cholera, for example, in its whole extent. That is, together, they form the true and only conceivable portrait of the disease, cholera. Now let's contrast that with this other English translation that was done by Host Kunsley, Naudet, and Pendleton. And I actually like this translation a lot in terms of reading. It's actually the most readable of all the translations. But let's go ahead and see how Aphorism 6 is actually translated. He writes, the unprejudiced observer realizes the futility of metaphysical speculations that cannot be verified by experiment, and no matter how clever he is, he sees in any given case of disease. Now look at that case of disease. When you hear case of disease, you might think, oh, that's the person who has the disease, right? A case of disease. Only the disturbances of body and soul, which are perceptible to the senses, subjective symptoms, incidental symptoms, objective symptoms, i.e. deviations from the former healthy condition of the individual now sick, which the patient personally feels, which people around him notice, which the physician sees in him. The totality of these perceptible signs represents the entire extent of the sickness. Together they constitute its true and only conceivable form. Now, when you read this translation, your sense of the totality of the disease is the whole person, not the disease itself, but the whole person. Here you can see the term is not specially introduced into the organ. It's composed of Krankheit es Fall, literally disease's case or case of disease. Krankheit is disease, sickness, illness. Fall in the original sense of the word is a downfall. Today, rather, we use fall case in medicine for a person suffering from a disease, and we normally assume that a case in the organon would be a person. If this be so, it should be possible to replace case in the organon by person. And so we can see, we can do an experiment. Does this work? Okay, so watch. Aphorism 27. reads, when translating into each single case, the disease is annihilated and removed only by a homeopathic medicine. This is correctly translated. If we replace case of disease by person, we would be annihilating the person by means of a homeopathic medicine. And then again in Aphorisms 73, Hahnemann writes, the cases of disease have an identical origin, e.g. the cases of cholera have an identical origin. Please note that here the term case of disease is used for cases of acute epidemic. Or do the persons have the same origin in an acute epidemic? Now I could go on and on and on, but basically what this is demonstrating is that for Hahnemann, the totality is the totality of the disease, each individual disease. Now that disease can mistune the mental and emotional and mental state of the patient, but it's still part of that disease. When you say that you're trying to, the totality is the whole person, then you're not only concerned with the symptoms of the disease, you're also going to include everything about that person. Oh, the person loves Star Wars. Oh, they love romance novels. Oh, they like to wear pink underwear. I should include all that in my anamnesis for determining the remedy. No, that's not what Hahnemann says. Hahnemann says that no, it's the change in feeling and function. That's why the words feeling and function are found so repeatedly throughout the organon. It's a change in feeling and function that we address the remedy to primarily. There are a few exceptions, but primarily we focus on the mistunement. What the German word is Verstimmen, the Verstimmen of the life force. Don't use vital force. Life force is more accurate. The Verstimmen, the mistunement of the life force, that's what we address the remedy to primarily. And these other things are of much less and sometimes even of no importance whatsoever. Kimberly, does that address this issue of totality?
Yeah, fantastic. It's very, very important. It has everything to do with the philosophical orientation a person starts with.
Completely. And the confusion arises actually from a lot of Kent's writings. Actually, Kent gave a lecture at his second postgraduate school in 1903, where he actually talks about the remedy as a person, and all of his followers begin to adopt that particular perspective. And it actually changes our orientation to homeopathy. And I believe actually creates some confusion and lack of success at times. Not always, but sometimes it can mislead you quite easily.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's do a case. So this is a case of a 63-year-old woman, okay? And I haven't summarized the case. I oftentimes do summarize my cases, but I have not summarized this particular case. So I'm just going to read through it. And what I'd like people on the call to do is to simply write down what you think is important. You're welcome to write down remedies that you think are potentially candidates for this particular case. But more importantly than coming up with a remedy right away is to identify those symptoms or those themes or ideas in the case that you think you're going to need to use to identify the best remedy prescription. Okay, so please take notes as I'm reading. I'll try to read fairly slowly. Write down what you think is important, and then I'll ask you to give me some feedback when I finish reading through the case. All right, so she says, I'm a very sick individual. I have so many health problems, very worried about the fatty liver and fatty pancreas. Maturity onset diabetes, she's insulin dependent. She has neuralgias all over her body, and touch and cold triggers the neuralgias. Let me find page down. Okay, the neuralgia started after I came to the United States. It started after a head injury in 1964. She has neuralgia in the right ear and right eye, and it's extremely bothersome. She gets grand mal epileptic seizures, but she hasn't had any seizures in 15 years. The seizure started in 1967. She takes Trileptal for the seizures. She says, if I walk a little faster, I'll burp, and then it hurts right under the breastplate. I also have a lot of pain in my right shoulder. For many years, my liver was enlarged. It still hurts when I touch that area. Pain from movement when I hiccup. Very difficult to wear things on the stomach. Hurts tremendously. Very anxious because it is very painful. Can't sleep on the right side. Suffer from bouts of colitis, spine problems, herniated disc, sacroiliac joint, gets shots to alleviate the pain. Both knees have arthritis. High cholesterol and blood. What's that? High cholesterol and blood pressure. Also has congestive heart failure. Now, at this point, can anybody tell me what I'm thinking at this point? Oh, let me read two more sentences. But because of the congestive heart failure, my body is very swollen. Both appendix and gallbladder have been removed. So what am I thinking at this point? Can anybody tell me? Any ideas?
That she's truly a very sick person, just as you said.
Yeah, I would even go further. I'm thinking there's no way I'm going to be able to cure this person. There's just no way. I mean, she's missing her appendix, her gallbladder. She's got a fatty liver, a fatty pancreas, congestive heart failure, neuralgia, arthritic problems, diabetes. I mean, it's like she's got like every organ system in her body is compromised, So I'm thinking, what chance have I got in a case like this? Okay. All right, continuing, sometimes gets pains in the back of the head once every couple of months. One son, it was a C-section when I was 34 years old. One time had kidney stones. After the stones was in the ICU for 3 days. At that time had bumps with itchiness. Sometimes develops asthma. This is when she gets bronchitis. Can get diarrhea after leafy vegetables. Has 3 bowel movements a day. Stenosis on the spine, was in depression during that time. Don't sleep well because of my knee, back, liver pain, etc. Can't sleep on the right side. She says it again. Now sleeps on the back. Perspires a lot when sleeping. In general, perspires a lot. Don't feel very good in the morning. Don't feel rested. Arthritis pain, etc. When starts moving around, it feels better. Tends to feel worse around 4 to 5:30 p.m. I prefer sunny weather. Don't like rain, snow, winter. Would prefer dry weather. Desires rice, eggs, cheese a lot, curries, etc. Has given up on sweets. Mostly vegan except some small fishes. I love coffee. Only drinks hot tea without milk. Don't drink a lot of water. Has given up sodas, etc. She lost her mom when she was only 42, and she feels very guilty that I wasn't there. Feel that the help murdered her. She's a very emotional person, writes scripts, acted and directed them. Music teacher, part-time. Also part-time librarian. Reads a lot of medical information. She's starting to forget words, especially nouns. She's very emotional, sometimes gets angry, doesn't stay angry for a long time. Not a vengeful person. I forgive, but don't forget. When someone hurts me, I stay away from that person. She says I'm honest and truthful. She used to throw things around when she was younger and yell at her family, especially the husband. She's stressed out about the son. He's very rude, but he can also be very generous. She has sadness about mother and father. She has no siblings. My son's in depression, says I'm not fit for this world. Why am I alive with all my health problems? This is what she says. Why am I alive with all my health problems? She feels guilty about the son. I couldn't motivate my son. I feel responsible for this. Once or twice thought about suicide after dealing so much with son's depression. I've let him down and feel very guilty about it. I'll never be forgiven. I have a lot of moral courage. It's not for me to waste my life. Son takes nerves out on parents because he wants to be independent. Very little jealousy. If someone tries to demean me, I might be jealous of their power. Normal sex drive. And then these are her husband's comments. So I spoke to the husband right after I took her case. And he said she has a very bad temper, but comes and goes, doesn't have any control over her anger, screaming, violent, a drama queen, very opinionated, very bossy, throws things around, doesn't have any control, even in front of her father. No physical strength, cannot walk for 50 feet, doesn't have the strength. Very honest, always speaks her mind. Belladonna used to help her neuralgia. Okay. The husband would give her remedies sometimes. Okay. All right. So that's the case. What do you think is important here? What would you focus on? What symptoms would you use to maybe find some rubrics that you would use for repertorization? Any important symptoms? Any thoughts? Can people hear me?
Yes. So, hi, I have a couple of thoughts there which I jotted down.
Sure.
So, she's more right-sided, the right side keeps coming up. It's a theme going through.
Excellent, excellent. That's a very important point. You see that all of her symptoms are right-sided. Okay, now
It's the liver, gallbladder, appendix, neuralgias, can't sleep on the right side. So it's very right-sided.
very, very good. So you can see the organ systems that are affected, liver and stuff is affected right-sided, but also all her symptoms, and she can't lay on her right side. So, you know, if we saw some of the symptoms on the right and some on the left, then we couldn't say that we needed a right-sided remedy. But this case, we can say, yes, we want a right-sided remedy. Very, very good. What else?
And the second thing was it started after trauma. The
Okay.
first thing, the start of the neuralgia is the first thing, like the whole story begins after trauma.
Yes, we don't know that everything starts after the trauma, but we
The
know that
neuralgia part
we
of
know
it.
the neuralgia starts after the head trauma. Very good, excellent.
That's it.
Good, good. What else? What else?
She has a 4 to 5:30 aggravation
Yeah, she feels worse around 4 to 5:30 p.m. Good.
and perspires a great deal.
She perspires a great deal. Good. What else? How about on the mental emotional plane? What are you gonna tell me about this lady?
Her energy level is very low.
That's for sure. Now that comes into play because that speaks to prognosis. We have to, if her energy is very low, then we don't know how effective our remedies are going to be. We might have to repeat the remedy more frequently. We might even have to go up to very much higher potencies to get her to react. We don't know yet, but that'll be useful information for us for sure. What about her mental emotional state? What can you tell me about her character?
She has both anger and guilt. Like there's a lot of anger and guilt at the same time.
Very good. I would agree. Those are the two emotional states in this person that I think are most interesting. She has a lot of anger. She can blow up. Her husband says that she's very bossy, very dictatorial, very dominating, right? So she's bossy, dominating, she's opinionated. She can blow up and get very angry, right? Very good. And then also she has a lot of guilt. She said that, and it's an interesting type of guilt that she has. She has a type of guilt where she actually feels like God has forsaken her, that she can never be forgiven. It's that type of a guilt. Okay, good. I think those are the most important points in the case, probably. Any suggestions on remedies here? Any thoughts? What do you think?
Nice case, Kim. And we have some comments in the chat. And Dr. Sweta, would you like to read, please?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Dr. Priya said it's a right-sided guilt, rheumatism, affinity to nervous system. And Dr. Kavita Kuknur's comment is no control and bad temper, and the remedy can be staph.
Staphysagria. Okay,
Yes.
good.
One more options. Dr. Meeta said Lyco. Dr. Meenu Brown Lyco. Lycopodium is coming in the majority.
Okay, so let me just comment. There's something that she says here that the husband says actually that works against lycopodium and even staphysagria. And that's where he says, very opinion, very bossy, throws things around, doesn't have any control, even in front of her father. Now we know that lycopodium, even though they can be very bossy and dictatorial and domineering, we also know that they will be that way when they're with somebody who they feel that is weaker than them, if they feel stronger. But if they're in front of somebody who they feel is superior or stronger to them, then they will submit. It's not to say that this can't be a lycopodium case, but generally speaking, that's a surprising thing to see, that even in front of her father, she's willing to get angry, that she doesn't have fear with anybody. And underneath lycopodium is cowardice. The totem animal for lycopodium is the blowfish. You know, the blowfish, when it gets afraid, what does it do? It blows up and it becomes big and says, I'm scary. But inside it really feels afraid. That's not really the feeling here, okay? Staphysagria also, the same thing is to be so bossy in Staphysagria is not so common. Generally, Staphysagria will be much more nice and shy and submissive and giving up their power. And of course, every once in a while, because they've suppressed their anger so much, they'll explode and throw things. But generally, it's very suppressed. And we don't really see suppression here in this case. So that's why I would say Staphysagria is maybe not the best choice. I can certainly see why you're thinking Staphysagria and Lycopodium, but I think there's a better suggestion here. Any thoughts? She also says something else. She says she says in terms of her food desires and aversion, she likes cheese a lot. So that's also
Cellodonium.
Cellodonium. Very good. Excellent. So let's look at the case. Let's look at the follow-up. Okay. So I did give Cellodonium 12C TID 3 times a day in solution, succussing 7 times between each dose. Now, the reason why, can anybody tell me why I'm going in with the low potency?
Just the weakness of her.
Yeah. When you have somebody with this level of pathology, be very careful with higher potencies. You can see tremendously intense aggravations and cause tremendous suffering for the individual. So when I see lots of suppression in the case, lots of serious tissue pathology, I'm going to go low. I can always go up. If I'm going to go low and I'm going to repeat, I'm going to adhere to what Hahnemann says in Aphorism 247 of the Organon, where he writes, it is an unexecutable project to repeat the same unmodified dose once, let alone many times, without changing the potency between each dose. And you do that by putting the remedy in solution and succussing between each of the doses. So I could have gone with a 6C even, but for whatever reason, I went with a 12C, 3 times a day, succussing 7 times between each dose. Okay. And here you can see a repertorization of the case. You can see ailments from anxiety, anxiety and heart complaints, anxiety and stomach complaints, anxiety of conscience, which is the rubric for guilt. And you can see that actually Cellodonium is in degree 4 in that rubric. So it's very, very strong for Cellodonium. And you can see it's actually in degree 3 in this next rubric, which is very interesting, which is anxiety of conscience feels that he has done an unpardonable sin and will be eternally lost. And that's exactly the type of sentiment. You'll see that both in Cali Bromatum, and you'll also see it in Cellodonium, where they feel that they've been given up by God, that their guilt is so terrible that they are eternally damned by the divine. Of course, Cellodonium is in bold type in dictatorial, aversion to listening, opinionated, rage, fury, eyes, right eye pain, right ear pain, complaints of the liver region with lung complaints, which she has, touch to the liver aggravates, pancreas issues, fatty degeneration of the liver, lying on the right side aggravates, and then desires cheese. And you can see the only remedy that runs through all of those symptoms is Cellodonium. Lycopodium does come up number 3, and generally speaking, those are the 2 remedies that you're going to have to compare in practice because they are very similar, and they address similar types of health issues as well. So let's just quickly talk a little bit about Cellodonium, greater Celandine. This is a member of the Papaviriceae family, or the poppy family. It also includes the remedy Sanguinaria canadensis. And Cellodonium was used in antiquity and the Middle Ages based on something called the Doctrine of Signatures. And it was used specifically for liver issues. And the reason is because if you cut the stem of a Cellodonium plant, you'll see that the sap is a yellow color. And according to the Doctrine of Signatures, you would take some aspect of the physical organism, a plant, animal, whatever it is, and something about its look or appearance or behavior would determine its medicinal properties. This is called the Doctrine of Signatures. And this is how Cellodonium was used in antiquity. I want to caution you that the Doctrine of Signatures is not, let me repeat that again, is not the law of similars. These are completely distinct things. As a matter of fact, Hahnemann created homeopathy and his use of the law of similars in response to the use of the Doctrine of Signatures. To him, the Doctrine of Signatures was not a reliable way to practice medicine. Now, Cellodonium is actually published in his Materia Medica Pura, and he talks, when he describes Cellodonium, specifically about this issue of Doctrine of Signatures. Okay, and he says that you cannot use the Doctrine of Signatures to rely on as a form of medicine in practice. He says it's not reliable in practice. He doesn't say it's not true or real. He says that unless it's been confirmed by approving, you simply don't know what to use based on that. In other words, let me give you a perfect example. You could look at snakes and you could say, snakes are ectothermically cold-blooded animals. It's true, they're cold-blooded. You could therefore assume that people who need snake remedies will be cold-blooded. But this is not the case. We know, for example, that lachesis tends to be a very warm-blooded remedy. There's a very interesting example of Vipera berus. Vipera berus, the European adder, is the only snake which is found in the Arctic Circle. No other snake is found in the Arctic Circle. And yet, Vipera berus is the chilliest of our snake remedies. You'd think it would be the warmest because it's the only one found in the Arctic Circle, and yet it's the exact opposite. We could look at snakes and say, oh, they don't have arms and legs, therefore they must be very good for people who are quadriplegic. You see, you don't know ahead of time what it's going to be about that substance that's going to tell you its medicinal properties. Retrospectively, it's very interesting to look back and make these types of concordances. But again, this is not the law of similars, and Hahnemann specifically refuted it in his writings. Cellodonium is a right-sided remedy. It affects the liver and the portal system, the abdomen, the lungs, especially the lower lungs, the mucous membranes, and also the bowels. And a well-known keynote of the remedy is pain in the right hypochondria, so in the right side of the lower part of the abdominal area, which extends to the inferior angle of the scapula. Now, we didn't have that exact symptom in the case, but what we did have was liver pain and also pain in the right shoulder. And that's enough similarity to this symptom to basically confirm the Cellodonium prescription. Cellodonium patients very often have a very strong desire for milk and cheese. They can also have an aversion to cheese, but usually you will see a very strong desire for cheese. And this is one of the distinctions between Lycopodium and Cellodonium, in that Lycopodium will desire sweets very strongly, whereas Cellodonium will desire cheese very strongly. Also, the Cellodonium patient, like the Lycopodium patient, will desire warm drinks and food, and they will be ameliorated by ingesting them. So this is shared by both Lycopodium and Cellodonium. Matter of fact, if I find a patient and I want to give them Lycopodium and they like cold drinks and they don't like warm drinks, I have to think long and hard before I give Lycopodium, because to me that's such a strong confirmatory for that remedy, as it is for Cellodonium. Now, the mental emotional picture of Cellodonium, as I mentioned previously, is very, very similar to that of Lycopodium, even though there are a number of unique differences between them. So the patient who needs Cellodonium, they'll be very forceful people like Lycopodium can be, with a need to dominate over other people like Lycopodium will need to. They can also have a lot of guilt. And I'm going to read here from Edwin Neekby's A Manual of Homeopathic Therapeutics, where he writes, Cellodonium causes a state of anxiety and agony of conscience, as if the prover had committed a great crime and must run away, or he feels that he cannot think and has lost his intellect, and his thoughts are distracted, and he forgets what he intended to do. The temper is excited. He displays ill humor at every trifle, is quarrelsome, irritable, and peevish. Daily outbreaks of anger occur without provocation. This is a very lovely description, I think, of our patient, guilt and anger, with explosive outbursts. Now, the Cellodonium patient can be extremely opinionated and imposing their opinions on others, okay? And oftentimes they don't even know what they're talking about, but they love to give advice, and they're very upset when it is ignored. These are people who are very strong-willed, and they want people to do things the way that they want. They'll tell you what to do and how to do it, and very opinionated, and they're oftentimes not that intellectual. Generally, Lycopodium patients tend to be more intellectually oriented. It doesn't have to be, but generally that's the case, whereas Cellodonium patients don't tend to be very intellectually oriented, but still extremely opinionated. Now, the dictatorial quality that's found in Cellodonium can seem similar to Lycopodium, except that, as I mentioned previously, Lycopodium really is much more of a coward, and we don't find that cowardice in Cellodonium. These Cellodonium patients tend to be very hard-headed realists. very much like what you'll see, for example, in conium maculatum, or calibichromicum, or calicarbonicum, or bryonia. All of those remedies, conium maculatum, bryonia alba, calibichromicum, calicarbonicum, these are all remedies that tend to be given to people who are very kind of realistic. They don't believe in imaginary things and feel good encounter groups and feeling your emotions. That's not how they are. They're kind of like, they want to live their lives and enjoy the pleasures and have a job to go to. They're very, very kind of hard-headed, realist type of individuals. And the Cellodonium people will, like the other ones as well, will tend to avoid intellectual pursuits. So as I said, they can be ignorant of a lot of things, but still they want to offer their opinion to everybody. Like bryonia, like conium, like Helleborus, the Cellodonium patients will tend to react very slowly to the remedy, and they'll be unlikely to report improvements until they see hard objective evidence that their situation really is getting better. Until they see that, they're not willing to admit anything. Okay, so let's look what happens in the case. This is the first follow-up. This is 1 month after starting the remedy. And she says, I'm feeling better, no doubt about it. Pain in the lower right side is much better, hardly any pain at all. Sleep is disturbed, but now able to go back to sleep. Still has frequent urination, which wakes me up. When speaking, still has difficulty remembering words. Okay, so that's what she says after 1 month. Again, remember, she's been taking Cellodonium 12C 3 times a day, every day for this entire month, succussing 7 times between each dose. So how do we assess this? What do we do? Any thoughts? Refer to another practitioner?
I think I would wait at this point, just stop and wait and see what happens.
So you would stop giving the remedy and wait?
Yes, I think so. I would just stop giving the remedy and wait.
Okay. Okay, good. Any other?
And see what comes back, what happens.
Okay, all right. Other thoughts?
I'd be likely to continue, I guess, at the same level, because it doesn't look like she is reporting any type of worsening at any level or new symptoms that need reevaluation.
Okay, good. So listen, if you're using the 4th edition Organon dry dose and weight approach method, if you're using that approach and you gave 1 dose of a high potency and 1 month later she says this, then you basically have to wait. That's what's involved in that particular method. You have to wait because you don't know that the remedy has completed its action, and your approach is to wait until the remedy has completed its action and the symptoms to return before prescribing again. But if you're using the 5th edition or the 6th edition, the 5th edition, the only difference between the two being that in the 5th edition, you're still using the C potencies, and in the 6th edition, you're using the 50 millesimal or Q potencies. But basically, the approach is the same. As long as the patient is improving, you continue, you don't stop, you just continue giving the remedy. That's the difference between the 4th edition and the 5th and 6th editions, okay? Is that in the 4th edition, you have to stop and wait. And in the 5th and 6th editions, you can continue giving the remedy while the patient is improving. The only exception would be if there was really dramatic improvement where everything was completely better and he was like basically 99 or 100% better. If that was the case, then you always stop. But that's not the case here. This patient is not cured. Their symptoms haven't all been taken away. They still have problems. Yes, they're doing better, but this is a scenario when you're giving a 12C to continue. As long as the patient's improving, as long as there's not completely elimination of all their symptoms, as long as there's not an aggravation, you just continue what you're doing before. So we continue. Second follow-up. This is 3 months after starting the remedy. Everything seems, this is 3 months. She's continued this 12C the whole time, succussing 7 times between each dose. She says, everything seems much better. I don't have any more pain. Even the neuralgia is much better. Still can't remember words, not having frequent urination any longer. My energy is much better. I'm flabbergasted at this point that she's doing as well as she is. You know, to me, I'm shocked. But again, it's the miracle of homeopathy. You know, you find a really excellent remedy prescription and you see these types of profound responses. So what do we do here? It's an easy one. Is she cured? No, she's not cured.
No, keep going.
We keep going. We continue, right? So we continue. As long as she's improving, she's not cured, she's not aggravating, we continue. It's because remember, we don't only want to follow aphorism 1, right? Aphorism 1 is that the physician's highest calling is to cure as it is termed. Yes, we want to do that, but we also want to adhere to aphorism 2, which says not only do we want to cure the patient, but we want to do it rapidly, permanently, and gently. So as long as we're not getting aggravations, we're happy.
What is the harm in going up to 30 at this point to turbocharge a little bit?
You could, but as long as I figure, why use up my potencies? Look, she's a very sick person. I don't expect her. I wasn't even thinking that I could really even help her long term. But whatever improvement she can experience, it's not going to happen in the short term. It's going to take a long period of time. If I start going up in potencies, I use up my potencies more rapidly than I need to. So I prefer to use up the potency until it stops working, and then I have more room to go up higher. That makes sense to you?
Absolutely.
Even the energy is much better.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because I don't know what's going to happen. I know from following cases for 10 years that things don't always go well forever. Things happen in people's lives and they get worse and they get better. And you have to be able to understand what's going on and to be able to manage it. So as much as I can reserve the higher potencies for later, I'm going to reserve them. Okay, third follow-up. This is 5 months after starting the remedy. The pain seems to be coming back and I'm not feeling as well as I was before. My energy is lower again, have started waking up with urination. My memory is still bad, but she has no new symptoms. So what do we do here?
30C.
Excellent. This is the place to give a 30C because you can see it's now. I'm going to use an analogy here. Let's see if I have one in here. I don't have it in here. So let's imagine, okay, that you're playing golf, okay, and you're Tiger Woods. I don't know if Tiger Woods is in favor these days, but you're a really great golfer. And you want to try to get a hole in one, but you can't get a hole in one because the hole is 250 yards away. And not only that, but you have to hit the ball up a hill. But let's say you hit the ball perfectly. And it doesn't have enough force to make it all the way up the hill, but it makes it part way up the hill, right? And because it doesn't have enough force and it's on a hill, it begins to roll back down. Now, if that was the perfect shot, when you have to hit that ball again, you have to hit it in the same exact angle. That's what you're seeing here. There's no new symptoms. If there were new symptoms that came up and those new symptoms pointed to another remedy, then I would know that I would have to change prescriptions right now. But that doesn't happen. I still have the same set of symptoms returning. So that's what happens when you hit the ball perfectly and it goes up the hill and then it rolls back down again, but it's still in the same line as it was before. Now let's take another example. Let's say Tiger's having an off day and he goes out and he slices the ball off to the right and it goes into a sand pit. Now with the second shot, he has to hit it from a different angle and he probably has to use a different type of a club because, you know, he's in a sand pit. So that's what happens when you give a remedy, and when the symptoms return, you get different symptoms, and those different symptoms point to a different remedy. So that's how you have to look at it. Because in this case, there's no new symptoms, we know we don't need a new remedy. We simply need to go up in potency because obviously the 12C is not sufficient to push the ball all the way up the hill. Does that make sense to everybody? I hope so. Okay. Fourth follow-up. This is 6 months after starting the remedy. So still not feeling well, have been experiencing a lot of anxiety, can't be left alone, want my husband around all the time. Sleep has been very difficult, waking up all the time. Have also been feeling very cold, lots of burning in my stomach, a lot of diarrhea, which smells horrible. It looks very dark, almost black. Everything seems to be worse. So what do we do here?
Reevaluate the remedy.
Okay. And why do you say that?
Because she's starting to throw off new symptoms that she didn't have before.
Very good. So different. This is the example of hitting the ball into the sand pit. Okay, you have to now shoot from a different angle and use a different club because the symptoms are different. So now, if these symptoms still pointed to Cellodonium, I'd have to assess this a little bit differently and might think that she's actually proving the remedy and stop it altogether. But these are really different symptoms pointing to a different remedy. Can anybody tell me what remedy is coming up here?
For me, phosphorus had come up very strong before. And now I'm seeing the burning and the cold.
Okay.
It does have black stool, but it's not strong, but it's there.
Okay, so you're making a mistake that Hahnemann actually refers to in the Organon in Aphorisms 167, 166, 168, where he talks about that when you're first prescribing, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you're not making this mistake, but I think you're making this mistake. But basically, when you first do the repertorization, you see, oh, look, Cellodonium came up high and phosphorus came up number 2. And so now you're thinking in your mind, if Cellodonium stops working, I'm going to go ahead and give that second remedy in the repertorization chart, phosphorus, because that came up number 2. But Hahnemann is very clear. He says, don't do that. He says you always have to retake the case and you see what the new symptom picture is. And he says very often, the remedy that comes up in that new symptom picture will not be that second remedy that came up during the first repertorization. Sometimes it is. And if it is, then he says it's extremely likely that that's the right remedy. I can see why you're suggesting phosphorus. The anxiety, can't be alone, waking up all the time, coldness. Phosphorus is so cold, burning in the stomach. But this diarrhea that smells horrible and very, very black, that's a keynote of another remedy which also shares all these symptoms. Does anybody know what remedy that is?
Well, Crotalus horridus?
Crotalus horridus. Yeah, Crotalus horridus, but Crotalus horridus doesn't have this anxiety about wanting to be afraid of being alone.
Arsenicum?
Arsenicum. Yeah, and Crotalus horridus, yes, would have black blood. You could even say elapse as well, right? With blackness, even more than Crotalus horridus. But yes, arsenicum, right? Look about it. Anxiety, can't be left alone, wants her husband around, waking up all the time, has been very cold, burning in the stomach, and that black, horrible smelling diarrhea. Those are all keynotes of arsenicum, actually. So I gave arsenicum album 12C 3 times a day, succussing 7 times between each dose.
I have a question. Can I interject with a question? I wanted to ask, should we be looking at related remedies?
Which remedies?
Related remedies, complementary remedies.
The nosodes?
No, complementary related remedies to Cellodonium. Yeah. Because, when you look again, did we look at those?
I did. Arsenicum is one of the remedies which is complementary to Cellodonium, just so you know, but so is phosphorus as well. So
okay. So we do consider that.
I don't think it would make a difference in that particular instance. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so here you can see, and you can see phosphorus did come up, but look at arsenicums in degree 4 in all of those rubrics, whereas phosphorus is in degree 4 in some of them, but degree 3 in the others. It is a close choice, but that offensive dark black stool is such a big keynote of arsenicum. You see it all the time, and so if you see that, I'm always going to give arsenicum in a case like this. If she had been, craving cold drinks and then vomiting them back up again, then I would have given phosphorus, but that's not what we were seeing in the case. Okay. So the 5th follow-up, now this is 7 months after starting the remedy. She says the anxiety is better, but still experiencing a lot of pain. Sleep is difficult. Burning pain in stomach is gone. Diarrhea is gone, but have a lot of pain in the liver area. This is a little bit trickier to know what to do, but in a case like this, I would suggest that you just continue because you don't really know if the arsenicum is going to continue working or not. So it's always best to not change before you need to. That's always the best bet. Try not to change before you have to. Just so you know, if you're reading Kent's lectures, you will see that Kent is less inclined to change the remedies. He will continue to use the remedy even when the symptom picture has changed completely. He says you keep using the remedy until it's done all the good that it can. Hahnemann, on the other hand, will change the remedies much more rapidly. And we see this both in what he says in the Organon, but we also see this as well in his Paris case books, where that was when he was living in Paris between 1833 and 1843, the last 10 years of his life. And you can see in the Paris case books that he would change remedies very, very quickly as soon as the symptom picture would change. So he will change much more frequently than will Kent. Kent will hold off and wait quite a bit longer. Sixth follow-up. Now, this is 10 months after starting the remedy. She says, have been feeling a lot of weakness and pain. I'm very discouraged. Don't want to live anymore. Want it all to end. I'm in a total state of despair, feeling very guilty for not doing better in my life. The physical symptoms are much like they were when we started, maybe 20% better. So she's 20% physically, 20% better. The pain is 20% better. She's 20% less discomfort, those things. But her mental state is not particularly good at the moment. And my assessment was that she's not doing well, and her internal organs are seriously compromised, especially her liver and her pancreas. And her cardiovascular system is also compromised. So what do we do here in a situation like this?
A lot of the physical and mentals are covered by Aurum.
Great. Any other thoughts? Are you going to leave her like this, or are you going to give her a remedy?
Give her a remedy.
You have to give a remedy. You cannot leave a patient in this type of a
Yeah,
situation.
give her a remedy.
Never. So you have to give her a remedy. And I agree. I think the best prescription here is Aurum. Okay. So I gave Aurum 12C 3 times a day, succussing 7 times between each dose. Here you can see some of the rubrics that I considered. Euthanasia, I do think that she's near the end now. And euthanasia is part of homeopathic practice. It's a very, very, very important part of homeopathic practice. We don't, everyone is going to die. And we have to recognize that. And part of our job is not just getting rid of disease and giving the person a wonderful, healthy life, as Hahnemann writes in Aphorism 9, the ability to reach the lofty goal of human existence. Yes, of course it is that. But it's also about helping somebody to transition from this life to whatever happens after this life in a graceful manner where they can still have dignity and they have to suffer the least amount possible. So this is a gift to our patients. So I use the rubric euthanasia. I use the rubric degeneration of fatty degeneration of the organs, which was very big in the case. The guilt that came out so strongly at the very end. She feels this tremendous guilt and this suicidal disposition from a state of despair. And that's essentially what she's describing. So I thought Aurum is definitely the remedy to give here. Usually we think of arsenicum in these types of situations, but arsenicum is only one of 27 remedies in the rubric for euthanasia. There are other remedies that we consider for this type of a situation. Yes, arsenicum is the most common, but there are others. So the 7th follow-up now is 11 months after starting the remedy, very tired, but feeling more peaceful, no anxiety or depression now, have accepted my situation. Pains are still there, but not as bad as before, much more relaxed. What do we do here?
Continue.
Yes, we continue. Okay. And I followed up with this patient for about, I think maybe another 7, 8, 9 months. I don't remember exactly. I have it in my notes someplace, but in any case, she did eventually pass, but she did it in a very peaceful way, full of dignity. Her family was there to be with her. The amount of pain that she was experiencing towards the end was really quite minimal. I never took her off the Aurum. She just continued using it, and it seemed to be the only thing that she needed. And eventually she just basically expired. So I think it's a useful case. It does illustrate some important aspects of long-term case management. And it also shows you that you have to be willing to work with people who are very, very sick and who we know that maybe aren't even curable. Any questions about this case or anything else that I presented so far?
Good evening. So it's good morning to you. Could I ask a question,
Please.
Doctor?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
You see, you gave before Cellodonium 30 on the last moment. Then you changed the remedy as it was visible is arsenicum. It was covering. And you restart with 12. Normally, as Kant says about to start the same last given remedy on the same potency could have been started 30 arsenicum. And the second question is that the second dose when you gave the aurum, my opinion and question that second dose of arsenic could have been helping as despair of life is arsenicum. There are 8 remedies, I think, in that rubric. Arsenicum is the main. As you gave the arsenicum, despair of life, she was really at that stage. As you changed the remedy aurum, that arsenicum could have been tried for one time, then change the remedy if it was not working, as Kant says also, at least 2 times.
Okay, good.
30,
So yeah, and this is one, I agree with you. This is one of the distinctions between Kent and Hahnemann, where Kent will not abandon the remedy and will go back to it as you correctly describe. But in my experience, I have found that if the symptom picture changes, I tend to change and follow that symptom picture. And as long as the patient is responding favorably, this is what I tend to do. You're right. I could have gone back to Cellodonium afterwards, but and we'll never know whether that would have.
I'm sorry, I didn't tell you to go back to color. As you gave 30, then you start with the arsenicum again 12. So I was thinking to start with 30. That was my question.
Oh, you mean for the arsenicum?
Yeah.
Oh no, you don't have to. You can change. You can use any potency you want.
You can change. Yeah.
You can change. Okay. You can use any potency you want. And with regard to the aurum and the despair of life, aurum is not in the rubric despair of life.
No, there's no aurum. It's arsenicum, calcarea, chimicifuga, califos, and magnesium muriaticum. These main remedies are there. Maybe you can check it even.
Yeah, so here it is. So let me tell you to add aurum in bold type to this rubric. Because what remedy has more despair of life than aurum? A total despair of life.
Aurum has. And also arsenic, as Dr. Madan, yes. I know it depends upon, like before we change to the other remedy, we would like to have the little higher potency kind of thing. That's what I think Dr. Ashok was.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, according to classical, we second dose of arsenicum with the same potency or going to higher to see really arsenicum as the state of anxiety, you know. But you change at once to aurum is not an easy remedy, you know, to give it at once. It was danger of suicidal. Then we might have gone directly to this aurum, maybe 30, just the same potency of arsenicum. But not to use at least one time more arsenicum, I was a little bit...
I understand. You could have gone from arsenicum to higher potency, but he was already using arsenicum, remember? He was taking arsenicum 3 times a day, every day. It wasn't one dose. He was taking it every single day. So you can't really apply Kent's approach as he describes it, because Kent never utilized solution potencies. Kent, even though Kent had access to the 5th edition, because the 5th edition was published in 1833, it was 1833, and Hahnemann and Kent dies after that. Even so, he ignores that idea of using remedies in solution and succussing between the doses. So you can't apply that to this particular situation. It's really a different scenario. Also, just want to mention here, you see vanilla in this rubric? This is a mistake. Whenever you see vanilla in bold type like this, that's an error in your repertory. Okay? Do ignore these types of remedies in bold type where you see them in bold like that. That's a mistake.
It's okay. There are still questions to be very clear, to be very precise, just taking Kent also in front of that. the 3 times with the anxiety, if Cellodonium was given 3 times a day, with the succession of 7 times to change the potency every time, it's okay. I can understand either 5 or 7 or 10, depends upon who is using. It's independently, no comments for that. But this arsenicum 3 times a day, it was really, if a dangerous anxiety of a person, I can understand 3 times, but normally we could have, it's my opinion, looking at arsenicum, 2 times a day, it was enough to change the potency with 7 successions, is okay. Otherwise, the cure was all right. I can understand everything is clear from your side, but still I have, in Italian is called susceptibility of the patient, that we are giving arsenic 3 times according to her anxiety, despair, okay. Otherwise, whatever you gave the answers is, I'm contented for that. Thank you very much, doctor.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
May I ask?
Yes, please, go ahead.
According to Aurum Metallicum, I am treating 2 17-year-olds and 1 20-year-old suicidal attempts, and one of them relapsed, and I moved from Aurum 30C into Aurum 200C, and the mind and their feelings got better. So you were talking about Aurum and with suicidal thoughts, and it's perfectly working for me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's obviously very important. Right? Does anybody know what Berningshausen says is the remedy that has the strongest suicidal thoughts? Does anybody know? It's very interesting. Who does Berningshausen say, which remedy has the strongest suicidal thoughts of all of our remedies? Anybody guess?
I thought it was Aurum.
How about natrum sulf, aurum et natrum sulf?
Yeah, believe it or not, it's nux vomica.
Nux vomica, yes.
Yeah. They won't tend to commit suicide, but they have very strong suicide, like nitricum acidum. They both have lots of suicidal thoughts, but they tend not to do it. They're too afraid to die.
Oh, my cases, they cut wrists and they choked. They were over what we expected, but Aurum is helping very much. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. What other questions can I can't, I don't think I have time to do another case. So we have 12 minutes. What questions can I answer for you? About anything.
Interesting, Kim. It is very interesting and interactive. Dr. Sweta, please. Can you take some questions from the chat or the Facebook, please?
Yes, ma'am. One question is there from Dr. Nita. How do we separate the totality of person from the totality of the symptoms in this case? Is her anger a part of the disease?
So that's a great question. There's a number of different ways of doing that. First of all, you're going to have to be able to differentiate what are the actual symptoms of the disease versus just normal characteristics of that particular individual, right? That's one thing you're going to have to do. So one way you do that is by taking the case very carefully. For example, let's say somebody comes in and they're very well dressed and everything is immaculate and everything is perfect and everything fits everything else and all the colors are coordinated and their belt buckle matches their shoelace, which matches their hat, and it's all designer clothes and they're very, very fastidious. Do you take that into consideration for determining the homeopathic prescription? What do you think? Do we take that into consideration?
Yes.
I do, yes.
You do, okay. What does Hahnemann say?
So that was the question, because you said that initially that Kent versus Hahnemann, one says that, you look at the totality, or in that translation, do you look at the totality of the person or the totality of the disease? So that's what I'm saying. Like, how do we know? Because we always.
I know. I'm going to answer that for you. I'm going to pull up Aphorism 24 from the Organon to show you. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
While Kim is pulling up the aphorism, we would request you all, there is a jot form that is posted by Dr. Sweta in the chat. Please, can you click on that one and to get the certificate for participation of today's webinar? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to read it from Aphorism 224 of the Organon, where Hahnemann writes, if the mental disease be not quite developed, and if it be still somewhat doubtful whether it really arose from a corporeal or somatic affection, or did not rather result from faults of education, bad practices, corrupt morals, neglect of the mind, superstition, or ignorance, the mode of deciding this point will be that if it proceeds from one or the other of the latter causes, it will diminish and be improved by sensible, friendly exhortations, consolatory arguments, serious representations, and sensible advice, whereas a real moral or mental malady depending on bodily disease would be speedily aggravated by such a course. The melancholic would become still more dejected, querulous, inconsolable, and reserved. The spiteful maniac would thereby become still more exasperated, and the chattering fool would become manifestly more foolish. What Hahnemann is talking about here is that the person's mental and emotional behavior can be the result of something they learned, their society, their family, the culture in which they live, or it can be part of the mistunement of that patient's life force. If it's learned behavior, it has no bearing on your homeopathic prescription. If the person, the patient, is somebody who grew up in a high socioeconomic class where everybody around them learned to dress really well and designer clothes, or they come from a country like Japan where everybody tends to dress up very well, then that has no bearing on the life force of the individual. It's just something that they've learned from their environment. You understand?
Thank you. Yes.
So that's one thing. That's one way to make that distinction. You take a very careful case and you identify those things which could be part of their environment, things that they learned throughout their lifetime. That's one thing. The other thing is, because symptoms in the case are related to each other, what you're going to find is if the mental and emotional behavior is part of the disease, it will be reflected in other symptoms in the case. So for example, you will find that the remedy cuprum has lots of physical cramps, cramping all over the body, cramps in the muscles, cramps in the throat, cramps in the intestines, cramping. But when you look at their mental emotional state, you also see that it's kind of cramped. These are people who want to follow the rules, who report people who make mistakes, you know, they're the tattletales, so they're cramped on the mental emotional plane. And you find this in all of our remedies, that the mental, emotional, and physical symptoms are related to each other and manifest similar qualities. So if you see mental and emotional behavior, you will oftentimes be able to identify it as being part of the disease because it will be related to other symptoms in the case. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for answering.
So those would be the two ways that I would identify the importance of any symptom.
Thank you. I had one more question.
Yes, please.
So it happens sometimes that you're treating a patient for, say, asthma, and they're getting well, everything's going well, and then some event happens in their lives, like there's a death of a loved one or an exam or something that triggers it again. Or they say that this happened and then this got better, worse. So do we take that event into account, or is it just that it got worse into account?
So when you're exposed to any stress, a few different things can happen. Let's say you're in a particular state. Let's say, what state was it? What remedy are you giving the person?
For asthma, arsenicum.
Arsenicum. So let's say they're in an arsenicum state presently, right? And they're exposed to some type of a stress. One thing can happen is that nothing happens and they stay in their arsenicum state and they don't get better or worse. It just stays the same. A second thing can happen is that they become worse, but with the same symptom picture. So they're worse, they're aggravated by that stress, it weakened them, but they still need the same remedy. They still need arsenicum. Or Another possibility is the stress comes along and it changes their symptom picture. Now they don't need arsenicum any longer. Now they seem to need, whatever, phosphorus or lycopodium or natrum muriaticum, some other remedy, because that stress has impacted them in such a way as to alter the life's force response to the disease itself. So, and it is even possible, it doesn't happen very often, but it is possible that the stress could even cure you, because the stress could be similar enough to the dissimilarity of your life force. But that very rarely will occur, but it can. Does that answer that question for you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And one more question from Dr. Kimberly. What have you found to be antidoting factors?
Well, Hahnemann says in chronic diseases, the number one antidoting factor is vexation. And vexation is stress, essentially. That's the way to understand that word. Some type of stress, adverse, it's something that happens in the environment. And that is also my experience as well, which makes a lot of sense, because when you're under stress, your adrenals produce cortisol, and cortisol affects your immune system, your lymph, and the overall functioning of your body. So when you're under stress and you're producing cortisol, it's going to compromise everything in your system. Aside from vexation, which is a very common antidoting factor, which Hahnemann alludes to in chronic diseases, I would say it really depends on the susceptibility of the individual. I don't find that coffee antidotes everybody. It really depends on whether they're sensitive and susceptible to coffee. We know that they say that peppermint tea or mint tea can antidote. I've never seen this except in one case. I think they usually associate with the remedy natrum muriaticum, but I've only seen it in one case of a patient who needed calcarea phosphorica, who every time he would drink mint tea, it would antidote his remedy immediately. Only case I've ever seen it. Bill Gray talks about electric blankets. I've never seen it. But he probably had a patient who was susceptible or sensitive to electric blankets, and so he wrote it down that that's what can antidote their remedies. But I think more than anything, difficulty in life, stress, anxiety, worry, those types of factors will be the most common to antidote our remedies.
Thank you so much, sir. And this is all about the queries. Over to you, ma'am.
Say it again.
Kim, in terms of antidoting, so if you had a patient who's doing marijuana, for example, would you give it daily, or do you find also you've not seen any antidoting with that?
You have to give it daily. Marijuana antidotes a lot of people. Matter of fact, I remember I was giving a lecture in Vancouver, British Columbia, and during the lecture, I actually mentioned that marijuana can antidote people's remedies quite readily. And then during the lunch break, I walked into the hallway and there was this lady crying in the hallway. I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Marijuana antidotes homeopathy." So yeah, it definitely does. And if you have a patient who's unwilling to stop using marijuana, you definitely have to give the remedy daily. The one thing about marijuana is that it changes a lot of people's mental emotional states too, so it can be more difficult to understand what the clear symptom picture is on the mental and emotional plane.
I know many of you have many questions, and since we are running out of time, Kim, would you mind take last question, or you're good?
Sure, go ahead.
So if anyone has any question, we will just take one question. And if more questions, you can most welcome to email us at carsteadygroup@gmail.com, and we will convey to Kim. So, and Professor Regina, would you like to say anything, please?
Yes, please. I would say thank you very much. It's been an honor being with you, Kim. It's been an awesome webinar as usual. I learned a lot from you. Thank you for the blessings. You said in the beginning that we would have access to the first part of your presentation. Would you kindly send to Kavita
I will do that
part, just up to the lady of 63 years old? Because due to my cancer pains, I'm on morphine, and my mind goes slowly haywire, and sometimes I couldn't keep up. And I made some notes, but still lack some. I would like to go thoroughly with the part you presented if possible.
Yes, I will be happy to do that. And I'm sorry that I'm from New York, so I tend to speak quickly, and I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you very much. It's been a blast.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste, namasko, right?
Yes. And Kim, it's a fabulous presentation. And today it was a little different because we usually take questions at the end, but today was a live webinar and everyone have enjoyed and have carefully prepared the material. Thank you so much. And as when the symptoms change, we have to change the remedy. And I have in my mind the Staphysagra because one of the clients with Cellodonium, after he had his tooth extraction and the suppressed anger and everything, it worked great. So anyways, it again depends upon, as you said, like apart from the principles we follow, it depends upon the person, individual, and what potency they need the best, we can adjust. And it was, and we have refreshed so much aphorisms and learned so many new things. Thank you so much for sharing this great information. And Kim, we would like to take privilege to honor you for your gracious presence and for your precious time with the caste certificate. Please kindly accept the gratitude from our team.
Well,
Dr.
thank you so
Sweta,
much.
please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very sweet of you. Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed spending this morning with you.
Thank you so much once again for your precious time, Kim.
Yeah.
And Kim, with your permission, can I announce the upcoming events, please?
Sure.
Okay. And on February 21st, we have Kate Birch speaking about COVID-19 research and updates. And also we have Kathleen Shibel, President of California Homeopathy Medical Society, speaking about CHMS at the same time. And we have many more renowned homeopaths like Kim and many more lined up for our CA webinars. So thank you all the participants who are joined from different parts of the India. It is late night for you. I know New Zealand, South America, Malaysia, Australia, many people. So thank you so much for your precious time. And I thank my CA study group entire team for the continuous support. And we have many CA volunteers today with us. With their support, we were able to make all these webinars, and we appreciate everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Sweta and Professor Regina. And Kim, would you like to say anything before we wrap?
It's just such a heartwarming experience to spend Sunday morning with all of you. Wish you all the very best in your practice. And if I can support you in any way, please let me know. And Kavita, thank you for doing such a great job to make good homeopathic education available to a bigger audience. You're doing great work. And thank you everyone else on the call, Shweta and Regina and Kimberly. Thank you.
Before we end, please fill the chat form to receive the certificate. And Dr. Sweta will wrap the session and enjoy the Super Bowl, Kim. Okay.
Thank you.
And
bye, everyone.
Everyone join the whealthandcourses.com. They are wonderful. And Kim is a great teacher. So you'll get so much learning from them. And do not miss the Jack conference. Please
Sounds
register.
good. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
There are
Dr.
people from
Sweta?
Iceland and Greece too.
Dr. Sweta will end the session, please. Thank you to all the homeopathic organizations who have honored the CA webinars, and all the speakers and the study group